"She will stand near the wall," said the woman beside him, laughing behind her fan, "and she will stay there. No one asks the Harrow girl to dance. It would be a kind of pity, and pity is so tedious at a ball." Duke Aldrich Vane of Mordell heard every word, though the woman thought herself hidden by the music, and he turned his head a fraction to find the object of her cruelty. Across the great hall of Windermere, past the whirl of silk and the blaze of 100 candles, he saw a young woman standing alone against the panelling as though she wished the very wall might open and take her in. She was not weeping. That was the first thing he noticed. Her chin was lifted a degree too high for comfort, her gloved hands folded before her with the stillness of someone who had decided in advance exactly how much she would let them see. He had come to Windermere against his own inclination. He came to few things willingly any more. Since the year that had followed the war, the Duke of Mordell had earned a reputation that walked into rooms before he did, the cold one. They called him the Iron One, the man who had buried a brother and a name and something softer besides, and who now surveyed drawing rooms as if pricing them for sale. Mothers steered their daughters toward him with the desperate courage of gamblers. Fathers courted his notice with the greasy warmth of men who wanted railway shares. He accepted none of it. He danced with no one. It had become, over 3 seasons, a settled truth of society that Aldrich Vane did not dance, and that the woman he eventually chose would be chosen for reasons of blood and acreage, and never once for the way she stood alone against a wall. "You see her, of course," the fan woman went on, mistaking his attention for shared amusement. "Miss Rosalind Harrow, the elder of the two. The pretty one married a baronet last spring, well, pretty enough, and this one was left over, as they say, like the last apple in the barrel. No fortune worth the naming, a father in disgrace. And that gown, your grace, is 2 seasons out and has been let down at the hem if you look, which no one will, because no one looks at her at all." "I am looking at her," said the Duke. The woman laughed again, uncertain now. "Your grace has a wicked humour tonight." He did not answer her. He had stopped hearing her. He was watching Rosalind Harrow accept, with a small courteous nod, the arrival of a lady who swept past her to greet someone more important, and he watched the girl's folded hands tighten by the smallest degree, and then release, deliberately, as if she had reminded herself of some private rule. He knew that rule. He had one like it himself. Do not let them see it land. Windermere was the house of the Countess of Sedgwick, and the ball she gave each June was the pivot on which the whole county's summer turned. To be invited was to exist. To be seated well was to matter. To be asked to open the dancing was to be crowned for a season. Every unmarried woman in 3 shires had come tonight wound tight as a watch spring, and every one of them had, at some point in the last hour, turned to see whether the Duke of Mordell had come, and where he stood, and whom he looked at. He knew this. He found it neither flattering nor strange. It was simply the weather he lived in. He had not intended to look at anyone in particular. He had intended to make his bow to the Countess, to endure an hour, to plead his estate and go. He owed the Countess the hour because she had been kind to his mother in a bad year long ago, and Aldrich Vane paid his debts even when, especially when, they were owed to the dead through the living. So he had come. And now he stood at the edge of the great room with a glass he did not want in his hand, and he could not stop looking at the girl against the wall. It was not that she was beautiful, though he thought, on longer looking, that she was, in a way the room was too stupid to see. It was the composure. The room was full of women performing ease and men performing importance, and here was one person, tucked into a corner where she plainly wished to be invisible, who was performing nothing at all. She was simply enduring with as much grace as endurance allowed, and she had clearly been enduring for a long time, and she meant to go on doing it without complaint until the carriages were called and she could go home. Who brought her? He asked of no one, but a young man near his elbow, Fenwick, a decent enough fellow, a neighbour of the Harrows, answered. "Her aunt, your grace, Lady Comstock, over there in the puce. She brings the girl about because she must be seen to, being family, but she's ashamed of her, everyone knows it. The father, you'll have heard. There was a business some years back, a matter of debts, and a partner ruined and a duel that never quite came off, and Harrow lost the estate and most of the name with it. He keeps to the country now and drinks, they say. The girls were left to fend. Rosalind teaches the vicar's children their letters for a little money. She's clever, they say, though a woman being clever never yet filled a ballroom with suitors. No, said the Duke, it never did. He was quiet a moment. The orchestra was tuning for the first set, and a stir went through the room, that particular electric stir that comes before the opening dance, when partners are claimed and the delicate hierarchy of the evening is fixed in 5 minutes for all to see. He watched 3 young men cross the floor with purpose, and not one of them so much as glanced at the corner where Rosalind Harrow stood. He watched a mother physically turn her daughter's shoulders away from that corner, as if plainness might be catching. He watched the fan woman rejoin her circle and say something, and the circle laugh, and one of them, a golden, glittering creature, all diamonds and confidence, follow the laugh with a slow, satisfied look across the room at the girl by the wall. That look decided him. Not the girl's dignity alone, though that had opened the door. It was the cruelty of the golden one, the leisure of it, the way she savoured the misery she had helped to make. Aldrich Vane had spent a great deal of his life around people who mistook the wounding of the helpless for wit, and he had at some cost stopped pretending he found them amusing. He set down his glass. He was aware as he began to move of the room, noticing. He was always aware of the room. A duke cannot cross a floor unobserved. The eyes came to him the way iron filings come to a magnet, and he felt the ripple of speculation go out ahead of him. Which of the diamonds would be so blessed? He saw the golden creature turn toward him and arrange her face into welcome, certain, as she had every reason after 3 seasons to be certain, that a man crossing a ballroom in that particular way was crossing it toward her. He walked past her. He was near enough to see the welcome falter on her face, near enough to hear the small intake of breath from her circle, and he did not slow. He walked the length of the great room of Windermere under the eyes of the whole county, past the diamonds and the mothers and the men who did not dance. And he came to a stop before the young woman against the wall, who had been so lost in the private work of enduring that she did not, at first, understand that he had stopped for her. She looked up. Her eyes were grey, he saw, grey and startled and instantly wary. And she glanced once to either side of herself to see whom he had truly come to address, because in her experience of the world no one of consequence had ever crossed a room to reach her, and she had learned not to make the mistake of assuming otherwise. "Miss Harrow," he said. She went very still. "Your Grace." The room had gone quiet around them, or seemed to. The orchestra had finished tuning. A hush had fallen over the near half of the hall, that particular hush of a crowd bracing for a spectacle, and he understood that most of them expected him to say something cutting. That they thought, in the small cold theatre of their minds, that the Duke of Mordell had crossed the floor to enjoy the plain girl's confusion, to make sport, to raise a laugh at her expense before returning to the diamonds where he belonged. He understood that she thought so too. He saw her steel herself for it, saw her chin come up that fraction, saw her decide in advance how much she would let them see. "They are forming the first set," he said. "Will you do me the honor of the first dance?" He watched the words reach her. He watched her not believe them. For a moment, one long moment in which the whole ballroom seemed to hang suspended, the diamonds frozen mid-glitter, the fan woman's fan arrested in the air, the golden creature's mouth half open on a laugh that had died. Rosalind Harrow simply looked at him, searching his face for the trick, for the mockery, for the small cruelty that had to be there because it was always there. She found none. That, he thought later, was the thing he would remember. Not her beauty, which the candlelight was now discovering. Not the whisper that ran the length of the room like fire through dry grass. Not the golden creature's face draining of its colour. What he would remember was the exact instant Rosalind Harrow understood that he was not being cruel, the instant her carefully held composure trembled, just once, because kindness, it seemed, was the one thing she had not braced herself against. She began and stopped, and he saw her gather herself, and he was glad, fiercely and unexpectedly glad, that she did not fall to pieces before all of them. "Yes," she said, low and steady. "Thank you, Your Grace. I will." He offered his arm. She looked at it as if it might be another trap. Then she laid her gloved hand upon it. He felt the faint tremor in her fingers, and thought no worse of her for it, thought better of her, that she trembled and came anyway, and he turned with the plain girl from the corner on his arm to face the whole astonished county. He led her to the head of the set. There is a violence in some quiet acts that no drawn sword can match. Aldrich Vane, walking Rosalind Harrow to the head of the first set at the Countess of Sedgwick's ball, placing her where the crowned girl of the evening always stood, was as aware of committing exactly such an act, and he committed it without haste and without apology, and he looked once, mildly at the golden creature and her circle as he passed, the way a man looks at furniture he does not intend to buy. The Countess of Sedgwick, at the top of the room, had risen halfway from her chair, one hand at her breast. The dowagers along the wall had ceased even to pretend at conversation. Somewhere a young woman said, too loud, "But it must be a jest," and was hushed. And through all of it Rosalind Harrow walked beside him with her spine very straight and her eyes fixed ahead and a hand not quite steady on his arm, and he thought, she does not know yet whether this will save her or destroy her, and she has decided to walk it out either way. He liked her enormously for it. They took their places. Across from him her face was pale in the candle light, and there was a brightness in her grey eyes that he chose not to name for her sake. The music began, the first slow figure of the opening dance, the one every eye in the room was fixed upon, and Aldrich Vane, the Duke of Mordell, who did not dance, bowed to Miss Rosalind Harrow, who danced. She danced well. He had not expected it, and he was pleased to be wrong, for it spared her the one thing that might have justified the room's cruelty. She had been taught, somewhere in the vanished years before the disgrace, by a good master, and though her gown was 2 seasons old and let down at the hem, she moved through the figures with a lightness and an unhurried grace that the diamonds, for all their diamonds, could not have matched. He took care not to steer her, not to carry her. He let her show them what she was, and she showed them. "You are staring, your grace," she said low, when the figure brought them near enough for speech. It was not coquette's line. There was no flirtation in it. It was almost a warning, as if she meant to remind him that whatever game this was, she would not play the fool in it. "I am," he said. "Forgive me. It has been some time since I danced with anyone who did not spend the whole of it telling me about her father's horses." The corner of her mouth moved. She caught it and stilled it, but he had seen it, and he counted it a victory greater than any he had won in 3 seasons of drawing rooms. "My father has no horses," she said. "He had them once. He has a great many creditors now instead, and they are far less agreeable company. So I have heard. Everyone has heard, your grace. That is rather the point to me." The figure parted them, brought them back. "You need not have done this," she said when they were near again, and now the steadiness in her voice cost her something. He could hear the cost. "I know what I am in a room like this. I made my peace with it years ago. It is a small unkindness, being overlooked, and I would far rather be overlooked than made a spectacle of. And this, what you have done, you must know this makes a spectacle of me. When you have gone back to them, they will remember that the Duke of Mordell danced with the Harrow girl for a joke, and they will make me pay for it long after you have forgotten my name." He was silent through the whole of the next figure. When he spoke again his voice had dropped so that only she could hear it. "I do not make jokes, Miss Harrow. I have not the temperament for it, and I have not in a long while had the heart. I asked you to dance because when I came into this room I found exactly one person in it whom I could bear to look at, and it seemed to me a poor use of an evening to look her from across a floor. As for what they will remember," and here he let his gaze travel, unhurried, over the watching faces, over the golden creature and the fan woman and the mothers with their turned-away daughters, "they will remember only what I choose to teach them to remember. I have been teaching them for 3 seasons. They learn slowly, but they learn." She looked at him then, truly looked, in the way a person looks who is trying to read whether the ground beneath them is stone or ice. "You are a strange man," she said at last. "I have been told so." "I meant it kindly." "I know," he said. "That is why it was worth hearing." The dance carried them apart and together, and the room watched, and the whispering did not stop but changed its note from mockery to bewilderment to a kind of avid, appalled fascination. And when the last figure ended and he bowed to her and she curtsied low and correct, there was a beat of silence in the great hall of Windermere in which no one seemed to know what was permitted. Then, from the top of the room, the Countess of Sedgwick began, deliberately, to applaud. She was old and she was shrewd, and she had buried 2 husbands and outmaneuvered a great many enemies, and she knew a shift in the wind when she felt one on her face. If the Duke of Mordell had chosen the Harrow girl, then the Harrow girl was to be reckoned with, and the Countess of Sedgwick had never in her life been caught on the wrong side of a reckoning. The room, uncertain, followed her. The applause spread, thin at first, then filling, and Rosalind Harrow stood at the head of the first set with colour climbing into her pale face and her eyes very bright, and she'd not smile, quite, but her chin came down from that defensive height at last, and she breathed. He returned her to her aunt. Lady Comstock in the Puce had watched the entire thing with the expression of a woman who has swallowed a wasp. She had spent the evening ashamed of her niece and was now required, in the space of a single dance, to be proud of her, and the readjustment was plainly agony. She sank into a curtsy so deep she nearly overbalanced. "Your Grace," she breathed. "You honour us, you honour the family beyond. I had no notion, that is, Rosalind is a dear, dear girl. I have always said so, always." "Have you?" said the Duke. Something in the two flat words stopped her. She looked up at him, and whatever she saw in his face, he did not trouble to make it kind, closed her mouth. "Miss Harrow," he said, turning from the aunt as if she were a hat stand, "I hope I may call at your family's home. Where do you reside?" He watched the question land on her like a stone in still water. Where do you reside? She resided, he knew, in the shabby remains of the disgrace, in some rented house or cottage where a drunk father wasted the last of a name, and to name it aloud, to a duke, before her mortified aunt, was to hand him the whole shape of her fall. He watched her decide again how much she would let them see. Then she lifted her chin, down from its defensive height, up now to a different and better height, the height of a woman who has decided she will not be ashamed of a poverty she did not make, and she told him plainly. "Millbrook Cottage, Your Grace, on the Sedgwick Road past the 3rd milestone. It is small, and it is not what it was, and my father is not always receiving, but you would be welcome." "Then I shall come," he said, "on Thursday, if that is convenient." "Thursday is convenient," she said, as though dukes came to Millbrook Cottage every Thursday, and it was nothing to remark upon, and he admired her so much in that moment that he very nearly forgot the crowded room and the watching eyes, said something he would have regretted for its plainness. He bowed instead. He took his leave of the Countess, who pressed his hand and murmured that he was a wicked, wicked man, and she had never enjoyed a ball so much in 40 years. He did not dance again. He had done what he came, without knowing it, to do. He went out into the June night to where his carriage waited, and the cool air was a relief after the candle heat, and he stood a moment on the steps of Windermere looking at nothing, and found that his heart was beating as it had not beaten since before the war, not from fear and not from grief, which were the only two things that had moved it in years, but from something he had thought worn entirely out of him, something absurdly like hope. Behind him, in the great house, the ball roared on. He knew what it was saying. He knew that already, in a dozen clustered conversations. The story was being made, the Duke and the Harrow girl, the scandal, the joke, the mystery. And he knew, too, that a certain golden creature stood somewhere in that roar with her ruined evening in her hands, and that she was not a woman to accept ruin gracefully. He had made an enemy tonight, and he had made her by choice, and he did not regret it. He had also made, he thought, something that might in time become a great deal more than a dance. That he did regret a little on Rosalind Harrow's behalf, because he knew what he was and what he carried, and he knew that a man like him did not come to a woman like her without a cost. But that was Thursday's trouble. He got into his carriage and gave the order for Mordell, and let the dark country roll by, and did not sleep. The house he returned to was called Blackmere, and it was the seat of the Dukes of Mordell, and it was too large and too old and too full of the dead. His grandfather had built the west wing to shame a rival and had bankrupted 3 villages doing it. His father had gambled the family within a hair of losing the whole and had then, in a fit of remorse, married an heiress and mortgaged his own daughter's happiness to pay the debts. Aldrich's sister Cassandra, married at 17 to a man twice her age for the sake of the settlement, dead of a fever at 22 in a house where no one had loved her, and his brother Julian, the bright one, the laughing one, the one everyone had loved, the one who should have been Duke and would have been a good one, gone at the wall at Vasterley with a hole in him that Aldrich had not been quick enough to prevent. Aldrich had not wanted Mordell. He had wanted a modest life and a plain commission, and to come home to Julian's happiness the way a man warms his hands at another's fire. Instead, he had come home to a coffin and a title and a great cold house, and he had learned in the years since to be the thing the title required, hard, watchful, closed, because it was easier than being the thing he had been, which was a younger son with a soft heart and no armor at all. Society mistook the armor for the man. He had let them. It kept them at a distance, and distance was the only mercy Blackmere had left to offer. He sat that night in the long library with a single candle and a glass he did not drink, and thought about a grey-eyed woman who trembled and came anyway, and for the first time in a very long time the silence of Blackmere did not feel like an accusation. It felt, faintly, absurdly, like a room waiting to be filled. Thursday, he told himself. Thursday. He did not know. How could he have known that in a bright, warm house across the county, the golden creature he had passed on the ballroom floor was sitting at that same hour with her mother, and that they were not weeping, and they were not raging, but planning, and that the name Rosalind Harrow was, in that bright house, being written at the top of a very short and very cold list. In the days that followed the ball, Aldrich found that he could not settle to anything. He had lived so long in the disciplined round of the estate, the rents, the drains, the letters, the endless machinery of a great house running down, that idleness had become foreign to him, and yet now his mind kept slipping its harness and wandering the length of the ballroom at Windermere and stopping, every time, at a corner and a wall and a girl who trembled and came anyway. His steward found him distracted. His housekeeper, Mrs. Peel, who had been at Blackmere since before Julian was born and who read the Duke better than the Duke read himself, said nothing but had the long shut morning room aired and the dust sheets taken from the small parlour at the sunny end of the house, and when he asked her why, she said only that it seemed a shame, your grace, for the best rooms in the house to sit dark, and that a house wanted a woman's step in it, and went about her business before he could answer. He did not answer, but he did not countermand her, either. And that evening he walked through the aired morning room in the late gold light, and tried to imagine a grey-eyed woman in it, and found that the imagining did not hurt the way the imagining of good things had hurt for 3 years, and stood a long while in the doorway, and was late for his dinner, and did not care. He rode to Millbrook on the Thursday, as he had said, and on the Thursday after, and then, because a week between was more than he could bear, he began to find reasons. A book he thought her father might like, a cutting from the Blackmere Gardens for the seed-gone garden at the cottage, a question about the old wars that only Harrow could answer on his good days, and Rosalind saw through every reason and named none of them, and let him come. And the cottage that had been a place of shame and siege became, that autumn, the one place in the county where the Duke of Mordell could set down the whole weight of what he was, and simply be a man in a chair by a fire, talking or not talking, watched by a girl who wanted nothing from him. You are easier here, she observed once, than I've ever seen you anywhere. Even at the Countess's, where you are safe, you sit as though the chair might be taken from you. Here you forget yourself. Here I am permitted to, he said. Do you know, Miss Harrow, that you are the only person in the whole of my acquaintance who has never once, not by a word or a look, reminded me that I am a duke. Everyone else in my life exists in some relation to the title. They want it, or they fear it, or they serve it, or they resent it. You behave as though it were a rather tiresome coat I happen to be wearing, and you would just as soon I hung it on the peg and sat down. It is a tiresome coat, she agreed. It does not suit you half so well as you think. You would be a great deal handsomer if you took it off more often. And then she flushed to the roots of her hair, having said more than she meant, and picked up her mending with tremendous concentration, and Aldrich Vanes sat in the firelight, and looked at her bent head and understood, with a quiet that was almost terror, that he was lost, that whatever careful walls he had built after Vasterley had a door in them now, and she was standing in it, and he had no wish at all to close it. He learned her that autumn, the way a man learns a country he means to live in. He learned that she read everything she could lay hands on and had taught herself Latin from her father's abandoned books to keep her mind from the walls of the cottage closing in. He learned that she was proud in exactly one direction. She would take nothing for herself, and generous in every other, that she gave the vicar's children the whole of her small heart, and gave her drowning father a patience Aldrich did not think he could have matched, and gave the one servant, an old woman half-blind, wages the household could not afford, because to turn her off would have been to send her to the workhouse. He learned that she was afraid of very little and ashamed of a great deal, and that the shame was all borrowed, all pressed on her by a county that had decided what she was, and that underneath it she knew her own worth precisely, and had simply learned to keep the knowledge private, like money hidden in a mattress against a hard winter. And he learned that she laughed rarely and beautifully, and that he would arrange the whole of his life, if she let him, around the getting of that laugh. He told her about Vasterly at last, on a grey afternoon when the rain kept them in and her father slept. He had not meant to. It came out sideways from some question of hers about the medal he never wore, and once begun he could not stop it, and he told her the whole of it, the broken line, the 2 hours, the way Julian had laughed even then, even hit, saying it was nothing, saying go on Rick, hold them, I'm right behind you, and the half-second in which Aldrich might have turned back and did not, trusting the laugh, and the silence afterward where the laugh had been. He had never told anyone the half-second. He told her, and his voice did not break, but his hands did something, some small helpless thing, and Rosalind Harrow crossed the little parlour and knelt by his chair, and took the helpless hands in her 2 small ones and held them, and said nothing at all, because she had learned in her own hard school that there are griefs to which words are an insult, and that the only decent thing is to stay and be near, and let the thing be as terrible as it is. You could not have known, she said at last, very low, a half-second. No man alive is quick enough to save a life in a half-second. You have punished yourself 3 years for not being God. I have, yes, I have. Then stop. She looked up at him, and her grey eyes were fierce. Not because it is easy. It will not be easy, and I would not insult you by saying so. But you carry a dead man on your back up and down that great cold house, Aldrich, and you cannot lay him down, and it is killing you slowly, and She stopped and went on more quietly. I find I have grown unwilling to watch it. That is all. I have grown unwilling. He looked down at her kneeling by his chair in the grey rain light, at the ruined daughter of a ruined man who had nothing and gave everything. And he thought that he had spent 3 years being pitied by people who wanted his title, and had never once been seen by anyone at all until this one saw him plainly, and did not flinch from what she sawed. Rosalind, he said, and could not then say the rest. It was too soon. Her father slept in the next room, and she had warned him, in the green lane that had not yet happened but would, that she had not so much heart left she could afford to spend it foolishly. So he only turned his hand in hers and held it, and they stayed like that a long while in the grey light while the rain came down, and it was enough, and it was the most he had let himself have in 3 years, and it was, he understood, only the beginning of what he wanted. Millbrook Cottage was worse than he had let himself imagine and better than he had feared. It stood past the 3rd milestone, as she had said, a low stone house with a sagging gate and a garden gone half to seed. And yet someone had trained roses up the south wall and had swept the step that morning until the old flags shone, and there were fresh flowers, wild flowers, in a chip jug on the sill of the parlour window. He understood the whole of her from that jug. She had nothing, and she made the little she had decent, and she did not apologize for it. She met him at the gate herself, in a plain morning dress even older than the ballroom gown, and she did not curtsy too low or flutter or exclaim. Your Grace, she said, you came. I said I would come on Thursday. It is Thursday. So it is. A small dry note that he was learning to listen for. I confess I laid a wager with myself that you would not. I have lost a shilling I could ill afford. Will you come in? I must warn you that my father is having one of his better days, which is to say he is awake and has been persuaded into a clean coat, but he is not always sure what year it is, and he may call you by another man's name. He means nothing by it. I have been called worse than another man's name, said the Duke, and followed her in. The father was a ruin, but a gentle one, a big man gone soft and grey and vague, with his daughter's grey eyes drowned in something that was not quite the drink and not quite despair, but partook of both. He rose when the Duke entered and made a courtly leg with the ghost of a manner he must once have had, and called him my Lord Ashcombe, which was the name Aldrich later learned of the partner he had ruined and who had ruined him. The two of them tangled together for life in the wreck of a business 20 years gone. Rosalind did not correct him. She settled her father in his chair with a hand on his shoulder and a low word, and served a thin tea in cups that did not match, and carried the whole visit on her own 2 shoulders with a competence that told him she had been carrying it for years. He stayed an hour past what courtesy required. He talked to the father about crops and weather and the old wars, gently letting the vague mind wander where it would, and he watched the daughter's face ease by degrees as she saw that he would not mock the ruin she loved. When at last he rose to go, the father caught his sleeve. "You'll be good to her," the old man said, suddenly and terribly clear, the fog parting for one dreadful moment. "She's carried us both. There's no one else. When I'm gone there'll be no one else at all. You'll be good to her." "Papa," said Rosalind, stricken. "I will," said the Duke to the father, holding the drowned grey eyes. "You have my word, which is a thing I do not give lightly. I will be good to her." He did not know, saying it, whether he meant it as the polite lie a visitor tells a fading man, or as something else. By the time he had reached his carriage he knew it was something else, and the knowing frightened him more than any charge at any wall, because he had learned at Vasterley and at Cassandra's graveside exactly what it cost to love a thing in a world that took things away. He came again the next week, and the week after. He brought the second time a physician from the county town, a quiet man, well paid to be discreet, who examined the father and spoke to Rosalind in the garden about laudanum and diet, and the management of the worst nights, and left her a little easier than he found her, which was the only gift Aldrich could think of that she would not refuse. She had refused everything else. He had offered delicately money. She had declined it with a look that told him she would sooner starve. He had offered to speak to the creditors. She had thanked him and said the debts were her father's and not hers to bargain with a duke over. She would take nothing from him but his company and his honesty, and so those were what he brought, and he found, to his own astonishment, that he had a great deal of both to give her, more than he had known he still possessed. They walked on the fine days in the lane above the cottage, where the hedgerows kept them from the road and the road from them. He told her things he had told no one. He told her about Julian, not the death, not yet, but the life, the boy who had once ridden a pig through the great hall of Blackmere on a dare and been thrashed for it and laughed the whole time. He told her about Cassandra, married off at 17, and the letters she had written home that grew shorter and colder and then stopped. He told her that he had not wanted the dukedom and did not, on most days, know how to want it, and that Blackmere was a house that ate its owners, and that he had for 3 years been slowly turning into stone because stone did not grieve. "And why," she asked him once, in the green lane, "do you tell me this? You have known me a month. I am no one. I cannot help you carry any of it. I have not even managed to carry my own. You carry your own extraordinarily well," he said. "And I tell you because you are the first person in a great while who has not wanted a single thing from me. It is a rare and quiet luxury, Miss Harrow, to be spoken to by someone who does not calculate. I find I cannot stop availing myself of it." She was quiet a moment, walking, her hands folded before her in that way she had. "You should be careful," she said at last, not looking at him. "You are a duke, and I am the ruined daughter of a ruined man, and the county has decided what our story is. If you keep on this way, you will find you have made me a promise you never meant to make, and I would rather—" Her voice caught, the only time he ever heard it catch. She mastered it. "I would rather you break my heart now, cleanly, this afternoon, than teach it to hope and break it later. I have not so much heart left that I can afford to spend it foolishly." He stopped walking. She stopped too, a pace on, and turned back to him, and the June light came green through the leaves and lay on her plain old dress and her grey eyes and her lifted, defended chin. And Aldrich Vane understood that he had come to the edge of a thing, and that there was no honourable way to step back from it. "Miss Harrow," he said, "Rosalind, I did not cross the floor at Windermere to amuse myself. I have told you that. I will tell you the rest, since you have asked for honesty, and you shall have it whole. I do not know how to court a woman. I have never wished to before, and grief has made a poor pupil of me. I will do it clumsily. I will very likely frighten you with my house and my name and the coldness I have worn so long I am not certain I can take it off. But I am not playing with you. When I say I mean to come on Thursday, I come on Thursday. And when I say, he stopped. He had not planned to say it here in a green lane with mud on his boots. He said it anyway, because she had asked for cleanness and she deserved it. When I say that I have not, in 3 years, wished to be in any room I found myself in until I found myself in yours, I mean that also. So, there is my heart such as it is. It is not much, it has been badly used, but it is not a thing I offer in jest, and I do not offer it to break yours. If you tell me to go, I will go, and you will never see me again, and I will count it the last kind thing I did, but do not tell me I am playing. I have not the heart left for games any more than you have. The lane was very quiet. A blackbird sang somewhere and stopped. She looked at him for a long moment with those grey eyes, and he could not read her, and he stood in the unbearable open silence and let her not read easily back, because he had earned no shortcut. I do not want you to go, she said at last, very low. Then I will not go. That is not the same, she said, with a shaken ghost of the dry note, as being wise. But I find I do not want to be wise this afternoon. And she put out her hand, not the gloved ballroom hand, but her bare hand, work roughened and small, and he took it, and stood in the green lane holding the hand of the ruined daughter of a ruined man, and was, for the length of one held breath, entirely and simply happy, a condition he had thought as lost to him as his brother. He should have known that the county was already at work. He should have known that happiness, at Blackmere and everywhere its shadow fell, was a thing that drew the takers away. He learned how much they had been at work the following week, when he arrived at Millbrook to find Rosalind white to the lips and a letter in her hand. Before the letter came, before he understood how quickly the county would move, there had been one afternoon that told Aldrich exactly what he was walking into, and steeled him for it. The Countess of Sedgwick, who missed nothing, had let it be known that she wished to see the Harrow girl again, and had contrived a small gathering nothing, a dozen people to tea at Windermere on a grey Tuesday, into which Rosalind was invited and Aldrich with her, and a careful handful of the county's sharpest tongues besides, so that whatever happened would happen before witnesses who would carry the tale. The old woman did nothing without a reason. She meant to test the girl, and to test the Duke, and to see with her own shrewd eyes what she was dealing with before she spent any of her own great credit upon the match. Rosalind came in her second-best dress, which was to say her only other dress, and she came alone, her aunt having discovered a convenient headache, and she walked into great drawing-room at Windermere where a month before she had stood against the wall, and Aldrich, watching from across the room, saw her hesitate 1/2 second in the doorway, saw the memory of the ball cross her face, the corner, the wall, the fan-woman's laughter, and then saw her put it down deliberately and lift her chin to the right height, and come in as though she owned as much of the room as anyone in it. He did not go to her at once. It was a cruelty and a kindness. He wanted the county to see that she could stand in that room on her own feet, unassisted, before he was seen to assist her, and she could. She crossed to the Countess and made her curtsy and said something that made the old woman's eyebrows go up, and then, God help her, made the old woman laugh, a short, surprised, genuine bark of a laugh that turned every head in the room, and Aldrich knew, in that moment, that whatever else happened, the Countess of Sedgwick had decided to be amused by Rosalind Harrow, and that was worth more than any dowry. It did not go smoothly. It was never going to go smoothly. There was a woman there, a Mrs. Danforth, a cousin of the Selwyns, sharp and sleek and sent, Aldrich had no doubt, to gather intelligence and to wound where she could, and she found her opening over the tea, in that sweet poisoned voice the cruel keep for public places. Miss Harrow, she said, how brave of you to come. I do so admire it. In your position I confess I should hardly dare show my face in a room like this, after everything, but then you have always been so much braver than the rest of us, haven't you? Living as you do, teaching and all of that. Tell me, is it true you take actual wages from the vicar? For the teaching, how very modern. The room went still in that particular way. Every ear bent to hear how the drunkard's daughter would answer, whether she would flush and stammer and give them the discomfort they had come to enjoy. Aldrich started forward, and the Countess's hand, without seeming to move, closed on his sleeve, and her old eyes said, wait, let her answer. So he waited, every muscle in him wanting to cross the floor and end it, and he watched Rosalind Harrow set down her cup quite steadily and turned to Mrs. Danforth with the mildest expression in the world. "I do take wages," she said. "I earn them, which I understand is unusual in this company, and I am not ashamed of it. The vicar's children could not read when I came to them, and now they can, and I was paid for teaching them, honestly as a labourer is paid for an honest day, and I sleep the better for it. I have found, Mrs. Danforth, that there is only one thing in the world that a person truly ought to be ashamed of, and it is not poverty and it is not work. It is cruelty. It is the taking of pleasure in another's pain. That is the only shame worth the name. And I am glad to say," she smiled gently, and let the smile rest one small moment on the sleek face across from her, "that whatever else I have lost, I have never yet been guilty of that particular shame. It is the one luxury I have always been able to afford." The silence held one beat. And then the Countess of Sedgwick laughed again, her bark of delight, and said, "Well answered, girl, well answered. Danforth, you walked straight onto her sword, and I for one enjoyed watching it, and the room, taking its cue as rooms do, tittered and turned and let the moment pass." And Mrs. Danforth sat with 2 spots of colour on her cheeks and did not try Rosalind again. Afterward, when the tea broke up and Aldrich handed her into the Countess's carriage, for the old woman had insisted on sending Rosalind home in style, another small public act of authorship, he held the door a moment and looked at her. "You did not need me at all," he said. "I stood there wanting to run you through with my own words, and you did not need one of them. You had your own." "I have always had my own," she said. "I simply learned long ago that using them cost more than it was worth, in a world that had already decided what I was. It is a strange feeling, Aldrich, to use them again and find that this time someone is glad of it." She looked at him from the carriage, and the grey light was on her face, and there was something in her expression he had not seen there before. Not hope exactly, but the loosening of a long guard. The first faint willingness to believe that the ground beneath her might be stone after all, and not ice. "You gave me that, not by defending me, by standing across the room and trusting me to defend myself. Do you know, I think that is the kindest thing anyone has done for me in a very long while. Anyone can fight for a person they pity. It takes a rarer man to stand still and let her fight, and be proud of her for it. Thank you." He shut the carriage door and stood in the grey Windermere afternoon and watched it roll away down the drive. And the Countess came up beside him leaning on her stick, and they watched it together a moment, and the old woman said, without looking at him, "You will marry that one, Aldrich Vane, or you are a greater fool than your father, and he was a very great fool. She is worth 10 of the Diamonds and 20 of the Selwyns, and the whole county is too blind to see it, which is precisely why you must, and quickly, before they open their eyes. Now come inside out of the cold, and let us talk about how we are going to make it impossible for anyone to stop you. Because they will try, Aldrich. Mark me, they will try. I know they will," he said, watching the last of the carriage disappear between the bare November trees. "Let them." "It is nothing," she said when he asked, and folded the letter away too quickly. "A trifle. It does not concern you." Rosalind. She had not, until that week, been able to say his given name, and he had not pressed her, but she had begun shyly to venture it, and he found now that hearing her withhold it, reverting to the careful distance of the early days, told him more than the letter would have. He crossed the small parlour and stood before her, and did not take the letter, because he would not take what she did not give, but he waited, and she was not, in the end, a woman who could lie to a man's face when he stood before her and waited. "It is from the woman you passed at the ball," she said. "Miss Selwyn, Genevieve Selwyn. You will not know the name. She was, the one everyone expected, the one you were meant to choose. She and her mother are much in society, and they are clever, and they are not accustomed to being crossed." She smoothed the folded letter with her thumb, a small unconscious gesture, as if she could press it flat and make it harmless. "It is a very civil letter. That is the worst of it. There is not a word in it that could be repeated to your discredit or hers. She writes only to warn me, as one gentlewoman to another, of the danger I am in. She writes that the Duke of Mordell is known to take up unfortunate young women out of a charitable whim, and to tire of them, and to set them down again, and that the last one, there was a last one, she says, a governess, 2 years ago, was ruined past mending and now lives no one knows where. She writes that she would not have me deceived. She writes that she remains my friend. He was very still. There was no governess, he said. I know there was no governess. She looked up at him, and her eyes were dry and furious and afraid all at once. Do you think I believe her? I do not believe a word of it. But Aldrich, there was his name at last, and it went through him like cold water. Do you not see what she is doing? She does not write to make me believe it. She writes to make everyone else believe it. This letter has already been read aloud in a dozen drawing rooms before it came to me. It is not a warning, it is a first shot. She means to make it impossible. She means to write a version of me so ugly and so pitiable that no matter what you do, the county will nod and say, poor deceived creature, and then, when it ends, poor ruined creature. And either way I am destroyed and you are the cold duke who used a plain girl and threw her off. She has thought it all out. She cannot make you marry her. So she will make certain that when you do not marry me, the ruin is mine alone. Aldrich Vane had faced cavalry. He had held a broken line at Vasterley for 2 hours with his brother dying at his feet, and he had not been afraid then in the way he was afraid now, because at Vasterley the danger had been to himself, and here it was to her. And he could not put himself between her, and this the way he had tried to put himself between Julian and the ball that found him. She has miscalculated one thing, he said, and his voice had gone very quiet, which those who knew him knew to fear. She has assumed that I do not mean to marry you. Let us correct her. Rosalind went still. Aldrich, I am not proposing to you out of spite for Genevieve Selwyn, he said. Understand that. If she had never written a word I would have come to this in my own time, slowly, as I warned you, but I would have come. She has only shown me that I have no time to be slow, and that my slowness endangers you. I have watched what my hesitation costs the people I love, Rosalind. I hesitated at that wall. I might have pulled Julian back, and I hesitated 1/2 of 1 second, and I have paid for that half second every day for 3 years. I will not hesitate over you. I am asking you to marry me, not to save you. You have saved yourself and your father 100 times over and want no rescuing from me. I am asking because I would be a fool and a coward to want the thing I want and not ask for it, and I have been a coward long enough. She was weeping now, silently, the tears running down without a sound, and she did not turn away or hide her face, and he understood that this too was a gift, that she let him see it, having spent her life letting no one see anything land. You cannot, she whispered. Aldrich, you cannot. Think what you are. Think what I am. Your name, your people, the Countess herself would, and Genevieve will only say it proves her, that you were caught, that I trapped you, a ruined nobody, a drunkard's daughter, no fortune, no. Rosalind. He took her hands, both of them, the bare work roughened hands, and held them, and did not let her finish the litany of her own unworth that the county had taught her to recite. I have spent 3 years being told what I am by people who have never once been right. I am done letting them tell me what I want. I want you, I have wanted since the moment I saw you refuse to weep against that wall, to spend whatever is left of my hard and haunted life making certain that you are never again the last apple in anyone's barrel. Marry me. Let them say what they like. I have a great deal of practice not caring what they say, and I will teach you, and I promise you it is the most restful thing in the world. She laughed, a broken, astonished laugh through the tears, and it was the first time he had heard her laugh outright, and it undid him entirely. You are the most impossible man, she said. I have been told so. You said once you meant it kindly. I did. She drew a breath. She looked, for a moment, back toward the inner room where her father dozed, and he saw the whole weight of it cross her face. The debts, the drink, the drowned mind, the promise she had made without words years ago to see the old man to his rest before she claimed any life of her own. My father, she said, I cannot leave him. Whatever I am to you, I will not be a wife who has abandoned her father to a hired nurse and a bottle. I know what you will say, that Blackmere is large enough, but he is a shame to me and a burden, and he will call your guests by dead men's names and be sick on your stairs, and I will not have you take that on for love of a month's acquaintance. He will have the east rooms, said the Duke, which have the best light and the quietest garden, and the physician will attend him twice a week, and no guest of mine will ever hear a word said against him, because no guest of mine will dare. I made him a promise, Rosalind. In this room. I said I would be good to you. I meant it to include the whole of you, and your father is part of the whole of you, and so he comes. That is not generosity. It is arithmetic. I cannot have you unless I have him, and I mean to have you so. She was quiet a long moment. Then she freed one hand from his and laid it lightly against the side of his face. The first time she had touched him so. The first time anyone had touched him so in longer than he could bear to count. And he stood absolutely still under it, as a man stands under something he is afraid to frighten away. Yes, she said. God help us both, Aldrich Vane. Yes. I will marry you. He did not kiss her. He wanted to. The wanting was a live coal in him. But her father was in the next room and the door was open, and she had spent her life guarding a dignity the world tried to take, and he would not take it either, not even in joy. He raised her hand instead and pressed his mouth to it once, and held it there a moment with his eyes closed, and when he lifted his head he found that the cold he had worn for 3 years had cracked clean across, and light was coming through, and it hurt, the way feeling returns to a frozen limb hurts. And he would not have traded the hurt for all the numb painless years behind him. Then we are engaged, he said, and I would like to see Miss Selwyn's face when the banns are read. You are a wicked man, so the Countess informs me. I begin to think she and your father are the only 2 people in the county who have ever seen me clearly. He smiled, a rare thing, a thing that changed his whole hard face, and Rosalind Harrow looked at that smile as if she had discovered a window in a wall she had thought solid. Come, he said. Let us go and tell your father, on one of his better days, that his daughter is to be a duchess, and that the man who promised to be good to her intends to keep his word, and then let us prepare, my love, for war. Because Genevieve Selwyn is not finished, and neither is the county, and they will not forgive us this easily. But we will not be fighting alone any more. That is the whole of what I have to offer you, Rosalind, and it is more than I have offered anyone since Vasterley. You will not from this day fight alone. They told her father together that same afternoon, and it was a thing Aldrich would keep among the small treasures of his life. The old man was in one of his clearer hours, sitting by the parlour fire with a rug over his knees, and when Rosalind knelt beside his chair and took his hand and said, "Papa, I am to be married," he looked at her a long time as though translating the words from a language he had half forgotten. And then his drowned grey eyes filled, and he said, "Married, my Rosalind, and is he good? Is he a good man? For I could not bear. I have been no good to you, I know it. I have been a millstone and a shame. But if he is good, is he good, Rosalind?" "He is good, Papa," she said, and her own voice was not steady. "He is the best man I have ever known. And he has promised to be good to you as well, and to give you the finest rooms in his house with the best light, and a doctor to mind you, and a garden. You will not be ashamed to anyone ever again. You will be my father, the Duchess's father, and no one in the county will dare say a word." The old man turned his head then and looked up at Aldrich standing tall and dark by the mantel, and for one of his terrible clear moments he saw him whole, saw the whole of what he was, and he said, "You are the Duke, not Ashcombe. I have been calling you Ashcombe. You are the Duke of Mordell, and you are going to marry my girl." And Aldrich said, "I am, sir, if you will have me for a son." And the old ruined man, who had lost an estate and a name and most of his mind and had nothing left in the world but a daughter he had failed, wept openly and without shame and said that he would have him gladly, that he had prayed for someone to come for her before he died and had not dared believe it, and that he could go easy now, whenever his time came, knowing she was not alone. "You will not go for a long while yet," said Aldrich. "We shall see to that. There is a physician I know who has done wonders with cases far worse than yours, and good rooms and quiet do more than any medicine. You have a great many good days left in you, sir, and I mean to see that most of them are spent watching your grandchildren spoil your garden." He had not planned to say it. He saw Rosalind's head come up, saw the colour rush into her face at the word grandchildren, and he did not take it back, because he found he meant it entirely, and there are things a man should not take back. The old man laughed, a wet, astonished, delighted laugh, and the fire crackled. And outside the small window the November light lay gold across the seed-gone garden that would come spring, be dug and planted and made decent. And for the space of that afternoon the shabby parlour of Millbrook Cottage held more happiness than the whole great pile of Blackmere had held in 20 years. Afterward, at the sagging gate in the early dark, before he mounted to ride home, Rosalind stopped him with a hand on his arm. "You must be certain," she said low. "Aldrich, I will ask it only once more and then never again, so hear me. You have seen it all now. The debts, the drink, my father calling you a dead man's name, the whole ruin of what my family became. And you know the county, and you know what Genevieve Selwyn is, and you know she will not stop. You are the Duke of Mordell. You could marry any woman in England with a word. You could have peace, and a great alliance, and a wife who brought you land instead of a millstone. Are you certain, truly certain, not certain out of pity or honour or spite at Genevieve that you want this? 'Cause if you are not, tell me now tonight at this gate, and I will let you go, and I will never reproach you, and I will manage. I have always managed. I would rather manage alone than watch you regret me." Aldrich Vane looked at her in the light of the lantern by the gate, Pain dressed, defended, offering him his freedom with both hands out of love for him, which was the most generous and the most foolish thing anyone had ever done in his presence. And he took her face in his hands, gently, the way he had learned to touch the things he was afraid to frighten. "Rosalind," he said, "I have been certain of very few things in my life. I was certain at Vasterley that I would die, and I did not. I was certain when I took this title that I would never be happy in it, and I was right for 3 years, and I am wrong now. Hear me, since you have asked it once more. I do not want you out of pity. I have never once pitied you. I have envied you, that is the truth, envied your courage and your warmth and the way you have kept your soul whole in a world that tried to break it. I do not want you out of honour, though I would keep my word to you now if it cost me everything. And I do not want you out of spite at Genevieve Selwyn. She is beneath my spite. She does not enter into it. I want you because you are the first thing in 3 years that has made me glad to be alive, and I have decided at last that I would rather be alive than be safe. That is my whole answer, and it is the truest thing I have ever said to anyone, and I will not say it again either, because I do not mean to give you cause. Now let me go home, before I forget that your father is 30 feet away and the door is open, and disgrace us both at this gate." She laughed, the astonished, unguarded laugh, and let him go, and stood at the gate with the lantern watching him ride into the dark. And Aldrich rode home to Blackmere with his cold cracked open heart hammering, and did not, that night, feel the great house holding its breath at all. The county received the news the way a still pond receives a stone. First the sharp shock of it, then the widening rings, then the mud stirred up from the bottom. The Duke of Mordell had offered for the Harrow girl. It was impossible, it was true, it was, once confirmed, the only subject anyone could speak of from Sedgwick to the sea. The Countess of Sedgwick, who missed nothing and forgave nothing but hypocrisy, sent for Rosalind within the week and looked her over for an hour with the pitiless attention of a woman appraising a horse, and at the end of it pronounced herself satisfied, and let it be known, in that offhand, iron way of hers that no one in the county dared contradict, that she considered the match an excellent one and would receive the future Duchess of Mordell as an intimate. That settled a great many waverers. A great many drawing-rooms that had prepared to freeze Rosalind Harrow discovered overnight that they had always thought her a charming, dignified, sadly used young woman, and always deplored the cruelty shown her, and would be honoured, quite honoured, to call. Aldrich watched the tide turn and took a grim satisfaction in it and warned Rosalind not to trust it. "They are cowards," he told her, "and cowards follow strength. The Countess is strong and I am strong, and so today they smile at you. But cowards also follow blood, and the moment they smell weakness, the moment Genevieve Selwyn gives them permission, they will turn on you as one, and they will tell each other they always knew. Trust none of them. Trust the Countess, who is honest in her way, and trust your father, who cannot lie, and trust me. The rest are weather. Genevieve Selwyn, for her part, did not go to war openly. She was far too clever for that. Openly she was gracious. She called at Millbrook with her mother, all sympathy, and sat in the shabby parlour and admired the wild flowers in the chip jug in a voice that made the admiration an insult, and pressed Rosalind's hand at parting and said, with her lovely sorrowful smile, that she so hoped, that Rosalind would be happy, and that she would be there, whatever came as a true friend, when Rosalind should have need of one. It was beautifully done. It left no mark that could be shown to a magistrate, and it told Rosalind unmistakably that the campaign had merely gone quiet, not still. The blows, when they came sideways in the dark, aimed always at the one place Aldrich could not fully defend, her past. A story surfaced that autumn, untraceable, unsigned everywhere at once. That Rosalind Harrow had been dismissed from the vicar's household for theft, that a brooch had gone missing and been found among her things, that the vicar had hushed it up out of Christian charity. It was a lie. The vicar, a stout old radical who owed no one anything, was so enraged by it that he preached a sermon on the bearing of false witness with his eyes fixed on the empty Selwyn pew, and wrote 3 letters, and swore before witnesses that Rosalind Harrow was the most honest soul in his parish and had taught his children their letters for 2 years for a wage he was ashamed to name. The lie collapsed. But it had done its work all the same, because a lie that collapses still leaves a residue, still teaches the county to look twice, still plants the small poisonous seed. Where there is so much smoke, then it was the father, someone Aldrich never proved who, but he never doubted. Arranged for one of Harrow's old creditors, a hard man long thought paid off, to reappear with a claim, an old note, a demand for a sum that would have ruined the wedding and shamed the name and dragged the drunken father through a public court on the eve of his daughter's triumph. It was. Aldrich saw at once, exquisitely aimed. It forced him either to abandon Rosalind's father to disgrace, or to pay the man and be seen to have bought his way out of a scandal, which would feed the story that the whole match was a purchase, a duke buying a poor girl and her debts out of a whim. Exactly as Genevieve had written in that first cold letter. He did neither. He looked into the note, and it was forged, and he proved it forged, a date wrong, a hand that did not match, a seal that had never touched that wax, and he did not pay a penny, and he did not hush it up. He brought it before the magistrates himself, in open session, and he named the creditor for a fraud, and had the old note read aloud and shown false. And he stood in the crowded county courthouse in his plain dark coat with his hard closed face, and let every soul in 3 shires see that the Duke of Mordell would not be moved, would not be frightened, would not be manoeuvred, and that anyone who came at the woman he meant to marry had best come cleanly and to his face, because they would find nothing else in him but stone. The creditor, cornered, cracked. He would not name who had put him up to it. He was too frightened of that person, more frightened than of the Duke, which told Aldrich a great deal. But the forgery was proved, and the man was disgraced, and the story died, and the county, which had been leaning toward the smoke, leaned back. Rosalind was magnificent through all of it. That was the thing that undid the schemers in the end, though they did not understand it. She did not break. They had built their whole campaign on the premise that a poor, overlooked, unloved woman, given a taste of happiness and then tormented, would crack, would weep, would make some misstep, would give the county the ruined creature they had been promised. But Rosalind Harrow had spent her whole life being overlooked and tormented, and she had learned in that hard school a strength the diamonds had never needed to grow. She met every lie with stillness. She went into every drawing room with her chin at exactly the right height and her hands folded in that way she had, and she was so plainly, quietly, unbreakably decent that the lies began to slide off her and cling instead to the ones who told them. And Aldrich found, watching her, that his own thawing had gone further than he knew. He had meant, at Windermere, to do a single clean act of justice and go home to his cold house. Instead, he had walked into a life. He came to Millbrook now not out of honour, but out of hunger, out of the plain animal wish to be in a room she was in. He read to her father, who had begun, on the good days, to call him by his own name at last. He learned the management of the bad nights. He sat with her in the shabby parlour while the autumn rain came down, and said nothing at all for an hour, and was more at peace than he had been in the whole of the great cold house of his father's, and on the night before the banns were first read. He stood with her at the sagging gate of Millbrook in the dark and the cold, and he did at last what he had wanted to do since the Green Lane, and kissed her once gently, and then not gently at all, and she kissed him back with her cold hands framing his face. And the county and the Selwyns and the whole world fell away for the length of it, and he thought, this at least they cannot take. This is mine, this is hers, He was wrong that they could not take it. He learned how wrong 3 days before the wedding when Rosalind vanished. Aldrich understood the shape of the war better than Rosalind did, because he had been 3 seasons inside society's machinery and knew where its gears were greased. He knew that Genevieve Selwyn's true weapon was not the diamonds or the drawing rooms but the story, the version of events that the county carried in its head, and that a war of that kind is not won by force but by authorship. Whoever writes the story wins. Genevieve had been writing it since the ball. The charitable duke, the scheming poor girl, the whim that would end in ruin. He set himself that autumn to write a better one, and to write it not in words, which the county discounted, but in acts, which it could not. So he did not defend Rosalind in speeches. He knew a man who protests too loudly is a man half believed. Instead he simply appeared with her everywhere unhurried, unbothered, as though the matter were settled beyond argument, which, in his own mind, it was. He walked with her openly on the Sedgwick Road where all the county could see. He sat beside her at the countess' dinners and deferred to her opinions on books and turned to her, visibly, for her judgment, so that a dozen watching gentlemen were forced to observe that the Duke of Mordell, who deferred to no one, valued this woman's mind. He danced with her, he who did not dance, at 2 more assemblies, the second dance and the third, until the ballroom that had once refused to ask her found itself, week by week, competing to be seen near her. He made her worth visible act by act, and the county, which followed strength, began to rewrite its own story without quite noticing it had been made to. Genevieve saw what he was doing and struck harder. The lie of the stolen brooch was hers, Aldrich was sure, though he could never prove the hand. And when it failed, the forged debt note was hers, and when that failed and disgraced her creature in open court, she went quiet. And the quiet was worse than the noise, because Aldrich knew her now, and knew that a clever enemy who goes silent is not defeated but reloading. He warned Rosalind. He sat with her in the shabby parlour after the courthouse triumph, when she was flushed with relief and inclined for the first time to hope the worst was past, and he made himself dampen her hope, gently, because a false peace is more dangerous than an open war. Do not trust the quiet, he said. She has lost 2 throws. She will not simply retire. She has invested 3 years and her whole pride in the certainty of becoming Duchess of Mordell, and she is watching that certainty walk away on my arm in the shape of you, and she is not a woman who accepts loss. She will try once more, and it will be worse than the others, because she has learned that the small blows do not land on you. You are too strong for them. They slide off. They cling to her instead. So the next blow will not be small. It will be aimed at the one place you cannot armor, and it will come from a direction we do not expect, and it will come close to the wedding, when a scandal does the most damage and there is the least time to answer it. I do not know the shape of it yet, but I know it is coming. I need you to know it too, so that when it comes you do not despair. Whatever they do, however it looks, you must hold to one thing. I will not believe the story they write. Whatever it seems, whatever it costs, I will come for the truth of you and not the seeming. Promise me you will hold to that. She looked at him a long moment, and he watched her set aside the easy hope and take up the harder truth, because she was not a woman who preferred comfort to fact. I promise, she said, and you must promise me the twin of it. Whatever they make it look like, whatever they make me look like, or do, or seem to do, you will not believe your own eyes over your own knowledge of me. Genevieve does not fight with lies, Aldrich, not really. She fights with arrangements. She arranges things so that the truth itself lies, so that a person of perfect innocence in a scene that damns them. She will not tell the county I am wicked. She will show them a picture of my wickedness, staged, from which no honest conclusion can be drawn but the one she wants. And you must be strong enough, in the moment she shows you that picture, to disbelieve the picture. That is harder than disbelieving a word you can weigh. A picture strikes before you can think. Promise me you will not let the picture strike you before you have thought. I promise, said the Duke, and marvelled at her, because she had described, without knowing it, the exact shape of the thing that was coming. The stage discovery, the picture from which no honest conclusion could be drawn but the poisoned one, and had armoured him against it before it came, so that when it came days later, in the form of a note in her own hand and a carriage in a dark lane, and a plan to produce her ruin before all society, He would remember this conversation in the shabby parlor, and he would not let the picture strike him before he had thought. She had, in warning him, saved them both, though neither of them knew it yet. He rode home that night through the first hard frost of the year, and the stars were very clear and cold over Blackmere, and he thought of the two promises they had traded in the firelight. I will not believe the story they write. You will not let the picture strike you before you have thought. And he understood that whatever the Selwyns arranged, they had already lost, because they were fighting two people who had agreed in advance to trust each other over the evidence of their own eyes, and there is no arrangement in the world that can defeat that. Genevieve fought with pictures. He and Rosalind had made themselves a covenant that no picture could break. Let her arrange what she liked. He rode home under the cold stars, almost at peace, not knowing that the arrangement, when it came, would take Rosalind out of the world for 3 days first, and that the covenant would be tested in the dark of an empty lodge before it was vindicated in the blaze of the raspberry rooms. But the covenant would hold. He had her promise, and she had his, and between two people who keep faith there is a strength that all the schemers of all the counties in England cannot break. He took her to Blackmere once, before the wedding, so that she should not come to it a stranger. It was a mistake, in a way, and in another way it was the truest thing he did, because Blackmere did not lie, and he needed her to see it plain and choose it plain, the way she chose everything plain. She was quiet as the carriage came up the long avenue, and the great grey pile of it rose against the November sky, wing upon wing, cold and vast and beautiful and sad. She did not exclaim. She did not, as every other woman he had ever brought here had done, begin at once to calculate the rooms, the rank, the wealth of the thing. She only looked at it a long while through the carriage window, and then she said gently, "It is very lonely, isn't it?" It looks like a man holding his breath. He had lived in Blackmere all his life, and no one had ever said a truer word about it. It has been holding its breath, he said, for a long time. My grandfather built to overawe, my father built to atone, no one built to live. I do not know that anyone has drawn a full breath in it since I was a boy, before the bad years. She walked through it on his arm, the great cold hall, the long gallery of vanes who had all been unhappy in oils, the library where he sat his solitary evenings. And she was not overawed, and she was not greedy, and she was not afraid, and slowly, room by room, he watched her do the things she did to the cottage, the things she could not help doing to any place she entered. She began to see how it might be decent. Not grand, it was grand already, weighingly grand, but decent, warm, lived in. She stopped in the morning room Mrs. Peel had aired and stood in the pale light and said half to herself that a person could be happy in this room, that it only wanted using, that it had been waiting. She met Mrs. Peel, who curtsied and looked her over with 40 years of judgment in one glance, and was plainly instantly wholly won, and who said to the Duke afterward, low at the door, "That one will do, your grace. That one will do very well. She sees the house. She doesn't see the title. I've waited 30 years for you to bring me one who sees the house." But it was at the end, in the family chapel, that Blackmere told its whole truth, and Rosalind met it without flinching. There were the Tums, the grandfather, the atoning father, the mother Warnthim between them, and Cassandra, married off at 17, dead at 22, brought home at last to lie among the people who had failed her, and Julian, the bright one, the laughing one, under a stone so knew the letters were still sharp. Aldrich had not meant to bring her here. His feet had brought him without his leave, the way they always did in the end. He stood before his brother's stone with his hat in his hands and could not speak, and Rosalind read the name and the two dates so close together, and she did not offer comfort, and she did not look away, and she did not pretend it was other than it was. She said, "Tell me about him. Not how he died. You told me that. Tell me who he was, so that I will know him, so that there will be one more person alive who knows him. That is a thing I can do. I can carry a little of him too. I have room." And Aldrich Vane stood in the cold chapel of his fathers before the grave of the brother he had failed, and told the ruined daughter of a ruined man about a boy who rode a pig through the great hall and laughed while he was thrashed, and who could not carry a tune and sang anyway, and who loved everyone and was loved by everyone and would have been a good duke, a warm one, the kind Blackmere had never had, and as he told it, something eased in him that had been clenched for 3 years, because grief shared is grief halved, and he had for 3 years refused to share it, believing that to speak of Julian was to wear him thin, when the truth, which Rosaline taught him without a lecture, was the opposite, that to speak of the dead is the only way to keep them, and that silence is not reverence but a slow forgetting, and that Julian, who had loved company above all things, would have hated the cold, locked silence his brother had built around his memory more than any words could hurt him. He would have liked you, Aldrich said when he had done. He would have liked you enormously. He would have taken one look at you refusing to weep against that wall, and he would have crossed the floor a full minute before I did, and then he would have spent the rest of the evening telling me I was a slow fool who nearly missed the only real thing in the room. He found, astonishingly, that he was almost smiling. He would have been right. I nearly did. But you did not, she said. No, I did not. He put out his hand and touched the sharp new letters of the stone, once gently, the way he had never let himself touch them before. I have been a slow fool about a great many things, Julian, he said low to the stone, but I crossed the floor in the end. You would want to know that. I crossed the floor, and I have brought her home, and I am going to be happy, and I am done holding my breath. You always told me to breathe. I could not while you, but I am going to now. I want you to know. Rosalind slipped her hand into his free one, and they stood a while in the cold bright chapel, and then they went out together into the November afternoon, and Blackmere at their backs looked, for the first time in longer than anyone living could remember, less like a man holding his breath, and more like a house that had heard, faintly, far off, the sound of someone coming home. They were 3 days from that homecoming being made whole and lawful. Neither of them knew, walking out arm in arm into the pale sun, that in a bright warm house across the county a golden woman had already given the last of her orders and hired the last of her men, and that the takers away were, even then, moving in the dark toward Millbrook, and that the hardest hour of all was very nearly upon them. She had gone out in the morning to the vicarage, as she often did, to take her leave of the children she had taught, and she had not come back. By evening the father was frantic in his vague, drowned way, and the one servant knew nothing, and there was a note. The note was in Rosaline's own hand, and that was the cruelty of it, the thing that nearly worked. It said that she had thought long and could not go through with it. That she had come to see the match was folly and would ruin him. That she had gone away to spare them both. That he must not follow and must forget her, and marry where his rank required, and know that she had loved him too well to let him wreck himself upon her. It was a good letter. It said all the things she had said herself in the Green Lane and the shabby parlour in the first weeks, all her own true fears, thrown back at him in her own true hand. A lesser man, or a prouder one, might have believed it. Might have been meant to believe it, to be wounded in his pride, to draw back stung, to let her go and, in a month, in the natural cowardice of a proud heart, be grateful she had spared him. Aldrich read it twice and did not believe a word. He knew her hand, and it was her hand, but he knew her, and this was not her. Rosalind Harrow did not run. She had stood against the wall at Windermere and endured. She had stood in the courthouse. She had stood in 100 cold drawing rooms with her chin at the right height. A woman who did not run from any of that did not run 3 days before her wedding in a fit of noble self-sacrifice, and leave her drowning father to a bottle and a hired girl. She had made him a promise in the Green Lane. She had said yes with her hand against his face. Whatever else Rosalind might do, she would not break a promise she had wept to make, and she would never, never leave her father like this, without arrangement, without provision, without a word to the old man who had no one else at all. That, more than anything, told him. She had abandoned the one duty she held above every other. She had not written this of her own will. He was very calm. Those who saw him that night said afterward they had never seen a man so calm and been so frightened by it. He questioned the vicar, who had seen her come and go that morning, cheerful, ordinary, promising to return. He questioned the servant. He rode the road himself in the dark with a lantern, reading the mud, and found where a carriage had stood in the lane above the vicarage, out of sight of the house, a carriage that had no business standing there, and the marks of where a struggle might have been, or might not, in the churned wet ground. And he thought of Genevieve Selwyn, who had promised, with her lovely sorrowful smile, to be there whatever came, when Rosalind should have need of a true friend. He did not go to the magistrates. There was nothing yet to bring them, and a public alarm would do exactly what the note intended. Brand Rosalind a runaway bride, a jilt, a poor girl who had lost her nerve, and give the county its ruined creature after all, whether or not she was ever found. If she had been taken quietly, to be produced later in some ruined condition, or spirited away for good, and either way the shame was designed to fall on her and the freedom on him. He would not play it their way. He went, instead, to the one person in the county cleverer than the Selwyns and older in the arts of war. He went to the Countess of Sedgwick, and he woke her at midnight, and he told her everything. The old woman heard him out without a word, sitting up in her great bed with a shawl about her and a candle burning, her shrewd old eyes never leaving his face. When he had done, she was silent a while. "You are certain," she said, "that she did not write it and mean it?" "I am as certain of that," said the Duke, "as I have ever been of anything in my life." "Then listen to me, Aldrich Vane, for I have buried 2 husbands and outlived every enemy who ever crossed me, and I know how these women think, because I was very nearly one of them once, before I learned better." She set down her candle. "The Selwyns will not have killed her. Understand that first, and let it steady you. Genevieve is cold, but she is not mad, and murder is a rope, not a scandal. No, the girl is alive, and she is being held somewhere quiet, and there is a plan for her, and the plan is this: they will not keep her hidden long. A vanished bride is a mystery, and mysteries can be solved, and mysteries make heroes of the men who solve them. What they want is not a mystery. What they want is a ruin. So they will produce her soon and publicly, and in some condition that cannot be explained away. Compromised. Alone with a man, or seeming to be. Fled to a lover, they will say, "See, we told you, the drunkard's daughter, no better than she should be." They will stage a thing that the whole county can see with its own eyes, and they will make certain you see it too, because your rejection of her in that moment, your public drawing back, is the crown of the whole design. They do not merely want to take her from you. They want you to throw her away, before everyone, with your own hands. That is Genevieve's masterwork, if I know her mother's daughter. She wants to make you the instrument of the girl's destruction. Aldrich had gone very white and very still. Where, he said, where would they stage it? Where all society will be, and soon, and where a scene cannot be hushed. The Countess's old eyes gleamed cold and clear. The Michaelmas Assembly, 4 days hence. At the Raspberry Rooms, the whole county comes, you cannot keep them out, and a thing done there is done before all the world at once. If I were Genevieve Selwyn, and I meant to break a duke's chosen bride upon the wheel of society, I would do it there, at the height of the evening, with every candle lit and every eye upon her. I would have her brought in, or discovered, in some ruinous seeming, at the very moment calculated to make you turn from her, and I would be standing near you when you did, in something exquisite, ready to catch you as you fell. Then, said the Duke, and there was something in his voice now that was not calm at all, something that the men at Vastily would have recognized and been glad to have on their side of the line, "We will be at the Michaelmas Assembly, and we will find her before then if we can. And if we cannot," he rose, "then I will play their scene, madam, but I will play it my way. They have written me a part in which I throw her away before all the world. I mean to walk onto that floor and do the opposite so completely that the county will speak of it for 50 years. But first I must find her, and I must find her alive and unharmed, and for that I need everything you know about where the Selwyns keep their people and their secrets, because you have known that family for 40 years, and I have 4 days. The Countess of Sedgwick looked at him for a long moment, and then she smiled, a terrible old smile with a great deal of teeth in it. "Sit down, your Grace," she said, "and send for tea, and do not think of sleep. You have come to exactly the right wicked old woman. Genevieve Selwyn made one mistake tonight, and it will hang her. She took a girl I have decided to like, from a man I have decided to approve, in a scheme I would have been proud of at her age, and am now going to take the greatest pleasure in tearing to pieces. Let me tell you about the Selwyns' hunting lodge at Faircombe, which they think no one remembers they own, and which stands empty, and which has a keeper who was turned off without his wages last spring and bears the family no love at all." The 4 days the Countess had spoken of shrank to 2 before Aldrich had his certainty, and every hour of them was a torment he bore in silence, because to show the Count his fear was to hand the Selwyns the alarm they wanted and to brand Rosalind a runaway before he could prove her a prisoner. So he wore his stone face and made his careful inquiries and did not sleep, and the not sleeping wore on him in a way the wars never had, because at Vastily the waiting had been for his own fate, and a man can bear his own fate. But this was the waiting for hers. And every hour he did not find her was an hour she spent bound and frightened in the dark, and the arithmetic of that was a thing he could not set down. He went over it again and again in the long nights. Had he moved too slowly? Had his 3 seasons of stone taught the schemers that he could be maneuvered, that he was cold enough to be worked upon, that a note in her hand would be enough to make him draw proudly back? Had his own reputation, the cold Duke, the Iron One, the man who used women and set them down, had that reputation, which he had built to keep the world at a distance, become the very weapon they now turned on her? Genevieve's first cruel letter had accused him of exactly the thing his reputation half suggested. She had not invented the ruined governess out of nothing. She had built her lie on the foundation he himself had laid, the cold and closed man who might, the county would readily believe, throw a poor girl away. He had made himself a monster to be left alone, and the monster had nearly cost Rosalind everything. He resolved in those grim nights that if he got her back, when he got her back, he made himself say it, he would spend the rest of his life unmaking that monster, not for the county's sake, for hers. So that no one would ever again find it easy to believe he would throw her away, 'cause he would have spent years proving, in every drawing room and rent day and Christmas and christening, exactly and visibly how he treasured her. The Countess was his general through those 2 days, and a better one than any he had served under. She knew the county the way a spider knows its web. She felt the twitch of every distant thread. It was she who traced the champagne silk woman's carriage to the Faircombe Road on a day it had no business there. It was she who remembered the turned-off keeper and sent, quietly, to sound him. It was she who counselled patience when Aldrich would have ridden out on the first rumour and ruined everything by his haste, and counsel it in words he never forgot. You are a soldier, Aldrich Vane, and soldiers want to charge, and the charge is how they die. You are not fighting a battle. You are freeing a hostage. Those are opposite arts. In the one you go loud and fast and to the front. In the other you go silent and slow and around the side, and you strike once, in the dark, when they are certain no one is coming. Do not charge Faircombe. Take it. There is a difference, and her life is in it. He took the counsel. It cost him more than any order he had ever obeyed, that waiting, that slow silent circling while every nerve in him screamed to break down the door. But the Countess was right, and he knew she was right, and so he waited, and planned and gathered his 2 trusted men, and studied the ground the keeper drew him in the ashes of a cottage fire, and made himself, hour by hour, into the patient thing the freeing of her required instead of the loud thing his fear demanded. And in the dead middle of the second night, he thought of one more thing, and it was the thing that turned the whole endgame. He thought of her father, the Selwyns' hold on Rosalind. The lever that had forced the note from her honest hand was the old man at Millbrook. They had threatened to break him, to revive the debts, to drag him through the courts, to destroy the one person she had spent her life protecting. So long as her father sat exposed at Millbrook, defenseless Rosalind could be worked upon. She would sign anything, do anything, to spare him. The lever had to be broken before the rescue, not after, or the Selwyns might still, even cornered, reach for the old man as a last cruelty. So before he rode for Faircombe, in the black hour before that last dawn, Aldrich sent his own carriage and his own trusted people to Millbrook, and had Rosalind's father brought, gently at his own pace, with the half-blind old servant beside him for comfort, to Blackmere, into the east rooms with the good light and the quiet garden, with the physician summoned to meet him and 3 of Aldrich's staunchest servants set to watch over him, and a standing order that no creditor, no attorney, no Selwyn, no stranger of any kind should come within a mile of the old man on pain of the Duke's whole displeasure. He did it so that when he broke down the door at Faircombe and told Rosalind she was free, he could tell her in the same breath that her father was safe, that the lever was broken, the hostage's hostage gone, the one fear that could still be used against her already answered. He knew her. He knew that even freed, even in his arms, she would not truly believe herself safe while her father lay exposed, that her first right question would be of the old man and not herself. He meant to have the answer ready before she could ask. It was the last thing he did before he rode. He stood a moment in the east rooms at Blackmere in the grey before dawn, and looked at the drowsing old man settled at last in warmth and safety, the man who had caught his sleeve months ago and said, "You'll be good to her." And he said, low, so as not to wake him, "I am keeping my word, sir. Both halves of it. Rest now. I am going to bring her home." And then he went out to where the horses stamped in the cold, and mounted, and turned toward Faircombe, and the breaking of the last door between them. With the Countess's counsel in his head and 3 years of stone falling away behind him and one clear purpose left in all the world. The lodge at Faircombe stood in a fold of the hills a half-day's ride away, and the turned-off keeper, found in his cottage and paid honestly for the truth, told Aldrich everything within the hour. A carriage had come 3 nights past, after dark. A woman had been carried in, bound, he thought, or drugged, quiet in any case and unwilling. 2 men guarded her, hired London men, hard and well paid, and a lady came each day to see that all was as it should be, a golden lady, the keeper said, very fine, who gave her orders and left before dark, and did not once go into the room where they kept the prisoner, as if she could not bear the seeing of it, only the doing. Aldrich did not ride in at the door. He had learned at Vasterley and after, that the frontal charge is the fool's weapon, glorious and wasteful, that the men who win are the ones who come from the side in the dark, where they are not looked for. He waited for the deep of the night. He took 2 men he trusted. His old sergeant from the wars, who had followed him out of the army and into the cold house and never once asked why, and a groom who could move like a poacher, and he came over the wall at the back of the lodge with the wet leaves silencing his boots. And he took the first guard at the kitchen door before the man had his knife half out, and the second the passage, hard and quick and without a wasted motion, and then he was at a locked door with his heart going like a drum, saying her name low through the wood, Rosalind. "Rosalind, it is Aldrich. Stand back from the door." He heard, from within, a sound he would carry to his grave, a sharp, broken, indrawn breath, and then her voice, hoarse from 3 days of little water and much silence, saying his name back to him as though she had not let herself believe he would come, as though hoping had been a thing she could not afford and had refused herself, the way she refused herself all luxuries. "Aldrich." "Stand back," he said again, and put his shoulder to the door and broke it, and she was there. She was pale and drawn, and her wrists were chafed raw where they had been bound, and there was a bruise going yellow along her cheek where someone had struck her. For that bruise alone he would spend a portion of his fortune, in the weeks to come, seeing certain hard London men transported past or returning. But she was alive, and she was whole, and when she saw him standing in the broken doorway with the lantern behind him, the careful composure of a lifetime broke all at once, and she came into his arms and shook and did not weep, even now, could not, had been too long and too hard schooled against it. And he held her and felt her shaking and understood that she had spent 3 days waiting to be produced and ruined and thrown away, believing, perhaps in her worst hours, that he would let it happen, that he would believe the note, that she would be after all the last apple in the barrel, discarded. And he held her tighter and said into her hair, "No, no, you are not thrown away, you will never be thrown away. I read your note and I knew you had not written it, and I have not slept since. Rosalind, have you? Be still, I have you. They made me write it," she said, muffled against his coat. "They stood over me. They said if I did not they would use my father, his debts, his court. They would break him utterly, and it would be my doing. I wrote it to spare him, Aldrich. I would have died sooner than write it for myself, but they knew he was the one thing." "I know," he said. "I know exactly what they knew and exactly how they used it, and it is over now. Your father is safe. He is at Blackmere as of this morning, in the east rooms with the good light, with the physician and 3 servants, and my own word of protection over him, and no creditor and no court and no Selwyn will come within a mile of him ever again. I saw to it before I came for you. Now, can you ride? There is a thing yet to be done, and I would rather do it with you beside me than for you, if you have the strength. But if you have not, you have only to say so, and I will do it alone, and you will rest." She drew back from him then, and wiped her face with the raw wrist, and he saw the grey eyes clear and steady even now, even here, and the chin come up to exactly the right height, and he loved her so entirely in that moment that it was very nearly more than a man could carry standing up. "Tell me what it is," she said, "and I will ride." The Michaelmas assembly at the Raspberry Rooms was at its height when the Duke of Mordell came in out of the night. The whole county was there, as the Countess had promised, the candles blazing in their hundreds, the crystal ringing, the diamonds and the mothers and the men who did not dance, and among them, radiant in something the color of champagne, Genevieve Selwyn, moving through the rooms with the bright brittle poise of a woman waiting for her cue. She had let it be known, in the careful sideways way, that there was to be a revelation tonight, that the truth about the drunkard's daughter would out at last, that those who had doubted her would see. She did not yet know that her London men were taken and her lodge was empty. She was waiting, at the height of the evening, for the moment she had built, in which a ruined and dishevelled Rosalind Harrow would be discovered in some staged and unforgivable seeming, and the Duke of Mordell would turn from her before all the world, and Genevieve would be there, exquisite, to catch him as he fell. The doors opened. The Duke of Mordell came in, and the whole assembly turned, as it always turned, the way iron turns to the magnet, and there was a beat of pure confusion, because he was not dishevelled, and he was not alone, and he was not the wounded, deceived man the evening had been designed to produce. He came in dressed as a duke should be dressed, dark and severe and immaculate, and on his arm, in a gown the Countess of Sedgwick had sent to Faircombe that very afternoon by fast rider, deep grey silk, the colour of her eyes, cut and fitted in 6 frantic hours by the Countess's own woman. Walked Rosalind Harrow, pale still, and with a bruise powdered but not wholly hidden along her cheek, because Aldrich had asked her whether she wished it hidden, and she had said, with the dry note returned at last, "Let them see what they did," walking a little stiffly from 3 days bound, but with her chin at exactly the right height, and her raw wrists bare above her gloves for anyone who cared to look, and her grey eyes level and clear, sweeping the bright ruthless room without a tremor, and the Countess of Sedgwick, who had been waiting near the door, rose from her chair and took Rosalind's other hand, and the 3 of them stood in the doorway of the Raspberry Rooms before the whole astonished county, and the Countess said, in her carrying, iron old voice that 40 years of society had learned not to interrupt, "My friends, I present to you the future Duchess of Mordell, Miss Rosalind Harrow, who has been these 3 days a prisoner, bound and struck and held against her will in an empty lodge at Faircombe, by hired men now taken and confessing, at the order of a person in this room. She was to have been produced here tonight, ruined and shamed for your entertainment. Instead, she comes to you as what she is, the bravest young woman in this county, and the woman the Duke of Mordell has chosen, and whom I have chosen, and whom you—" The old eyes went round the room, slow, cold, resting one long terrible moment on a figure in champagne silk. "You will now, every one of you, receive with honour, or you will answer to me, and you all know precisely what that means." The silence that followed was the deepest Aldrich had ever heard in a crowded room, and then Genevieve Selwyn, who was clever, who saw in a heartbeat that the whole edifice had fallen, that her men were taken and confessing, and the Countess herself had turned the sword in her hand, tried to do the one thing left to her, tried to laugh lightly, to call it a fantasy, a slander, an outrage, to turn and sweep from the room as though untouched. "Faircombe," said the Duke of Mordell quietly into the silence, and she stopped as though struck. "Your family's lodge, madam, which you thought no one remembered you owned. Your keeper, turned off without his wages, who watched you come each day and give your orders and leave before dark, because you could not bear to see the room. The 2 London men, who are at this hour in the county gaol, and who, being hired men, and finding themselves suddenly with nothing left to sell, have named you and your mother freely and at length. There is no version of this evening that you walk out of untouched. I have spent 3 seasons letting the county tell me what I am. I have spent these 3 days learning what you are. The difference between us, Miss Selwyn, is that everything I have said tonight is true, and can be proved before a magistrate, and will be. You reached for the one thing you thought I would not fight for, a poor, overlooked, unwanted girl no one would miss. You could not have chosen more wrongly. She is the only thing I would burn the world down to keep, and you have handed me the torch." Genevieve Selwyn did not answer. There was no answer. She stood a moment in her champagne silk in the blazing candlelight with the whole counties upon her, watching the story she had authored rewrite its ending in her own ruin, and then she turned, white and shaking, and went, not swept glided, but went, half stumbling, out through a crowd that drew back its skirts from her as she passed exactly as months before it had drawn its skirts from the girl against the wall. The wheel had come round. The county which followed strength and blood and the Countess of Sedgwick had chosen its side, and its side was not hers, and it never would be again. She left the county within the month. She did not return. But that was later, that night in the raspberry rooms. There was only the aftermath of the silence, and then the music, which someone had the wit to strike up, the first slow figure of an opening dance, and the Duke of Mordell turned to Rosalind Harrow in her grey silk with her bruised cheek, and her raw wrists and her chin at exactly the right height. In a room where every eye in the county was fixed upon them, and he bowed to her as he had bowed at Windermere, and he said, so that all could hear it, "Miss Harrow, will you do me the honour of the first dance?" And Rosalind Harrow, who had entered a grand ball once trembling and unwanted and braced for humiliation, and had been chosen instead before all society, looked up at the most feared and most sought-after man in 3 shires, and this time she did not search his face for the trick, because she had learned at last that there was none, and she smiled outright, unguarded, the whole of it, and she said, clear and steady and glad, "The honour is mine, your grace. It always was." They were married 11 days later, quietly, in the little church by Millbrook, with the vicar beaming and the children she had taught strewing the path with the last of the autumn flowers, and the Countess of Sedgwick in the front pew weeping and denying furiously that she wept. Her father gave her away. It was one of his good days. The physician and the good rooms and the quiet garden of Blackmere had given him more good days than anyone had thought were left in him, and he knew where he was, and he knew who she was, and he knew the tall, dark man waiting at the altar. And he put his daughter's hand into Aldrich Vane's with his own steady for once and clear, and he said, "Lo, only for the 2 of them. You kept your word, my lord. You were good to her." And Aldrich said, "I have only begun, sir," and meant it. Blackmere ceased to be a house that ate its owners. It took some years. Grief-cold houses do not warm in a season, but children's voices carry a long way down old stone passages, and Rosalind, who had learned in a hard school the trick of making the little she had decent, proved to have a genius for making a great deal into something warmer than mere grandeur, and the east rooms with the good light kept a gentle old man comfortable to the peaceful end of his days, and the cold Duke of Mordell was seen, more than once in later years, to laugh out loud in his own hall in a way that made the servants stop and smile at one another, because they remembered what he had been. He never forgot the wall at Windermere. He told her so once long after, when they were old and the county had long since agreed that the Duchess of Mordell was the finest woman in 3 shires and had always, always thought so. He told her that of all the things he had done in his hard and haunted life, the wars, the debts he had paid, the ruined name he had rebuilt, the one he was proudest of, the one he would answer for gladly at any judgment, was the single act of crossing one crowded floor to a girl who had braced herself for cruelty and asking her, before all the world, for the first dance. "You were the bravest thing in that room," he told her, "and the only true one, and everyone in it was too great a fool to see it but me. You were not so wise yourself," she said, with the dry note she had never lost. "You very nearly danced with Genevieve Selwyn." "I did not," said the Duke of Mordell, "come within 40 feet of her, and I never shall, and I have thanked God for the walk across that floor every day of my life." And he took his wife's hand, the bare one, the small one, roughened once and soft now, that had trembled on his arm at Windermere and never trembled since, and he raised it to his lips and held it there, and was, as he had been in a green lane a lifetime before, entirely and simply happy, a condition the takers away had tried to strip from him, and had failed, because he had crossed a floor when it mattered, and chosen and held on,